Facebook of ISTAC on the ISTAC Facebook page. Today is our 7th and the last lecture by Professor Osman Bakar. I thank him very much for giving a series of talks since I think since we began with this semester, about over 3 months, and today is his last, and inshallah he hopes to compile them into a book after the end of this lecture, so that it will become a source of reading about different topics about Islam as a way of knowledge, Islam as a way of love, Islam as a way of freedom. And today is a very interesting topic of Raison d'etre of Islam. I will let him explain the term, what he means by the French term, raison. Let's say it again. Is synthesis, the raison d'etre of Islam. Now, Professor Osman does not need any introduction. I've introduced him many times. He's a very well-known personality all over the world, and in my view, the most important philosopher in Malaysia. In Malaysia, he's an intellectual. He has published lots of books. I don't want to repeat all that again, so that we can get more time for discussion. So, with this short introduction, I invite Professor Osman to begin his lecture. Professor Osman, please unmute yourself, and you can. The floor is yours. Bismillah. Yeah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, very good morning. Selamat Hari Raya Idul Fitri, Eid Mubarak. Although we are already into the 5th, 6th days of our celebration, it's a different kind of celebration altogether this year. But anyway, Alhamdulillah, I'm happy to be able to present this 7th and last lecture in the ISTAC community, this lecture series, community engagement lecture series. Now, inshallah, I'll explain the meaning of the topic as we progress. I think this become clear, inshallah. All right, let me start by saying that we are familiar with the idea of the human mind performing both analysis and synthesis. In Islamic logic and philosophy, the two concepts of analysis and synthesis are respectively signified by the word at-tahlil and at-tarkib. In both Islamic and Western intellectual traditions, the two concepts are viewed as fundamental to the pursuit and advancement of knowledge. Very, very crucial. Analysis and synthesis. There is a general understanding in both traditions that it is in the nature of the human mind to perform analysis and synthesis, thus implying the acceptance of the great significance of these acts to both individual human development as well as to civilization or collective civilizational development. But there is also the generalization in both traditions that analysis and synthesis may be collectively pursued on various scales, and to various degrees of sophistication and profundity. You all professors, lecturers, students, you know very well. Yeah? When we look at the history of both civilizations, Western and Islamic, we can find numerous works, in a sense, doing both analysis of ideas and analysis of ideas. They are different. So in Islamic and Western histories, we have in the realm of knowledge both shallow and deep analysis, and also both small and grand synthesis. However, Islam and the West have different visions, and different civilizational experiences in their pursuits of these two great epistemological ideas. In this lecture, in giving examples, my focus will be on the grand synthesis. Grand synthesis, leaving aside analysis altogether. I'm not going to touch on analysis, partly because this is a subject in which most people are comfortable, or what most people do. People doing analysis. You look at all the PhD thesis, nowadays it's all about analysis. It's about analysis, but very, very few about synthesis. So I'm focused on the synthesis, not on the small scale synthesis, but on the grand ones, because this is going to talk about basically this grand synthesis as to be found in the Quranic narratives. Now, as I said, I have several reasons for focusing on synthesis, and I hope this will become clearer as we move on in our discussion. One major difference between Islamic and Western discourses on analysis and synthesis pertains to the theological dimension of both sides. In other words, when we say analysis, we say synthesis, it's not purely about human reason. It's not purely about reason, human reason, but there is also a theological dimension. God has to come into the picture as well. Right? So I will argue that in the case of Islam, the theological dimension of analysis and synthesis, especially the latter, especially the synthesis, is more visible and more pronounced than in the West, especially in the modern West. And, actually, in the modern West, the theological dimension is peripheral to discourse. But even in the medieval West, the theological dimension was peripheral compared to what occurred in the history of Islamic thought. There's a very important factor that explains for this major difference between the two discourses that is worth noting. This factor has to do with the difference between Islam and Christianity, the main religion in the West. Right? The difference between Islam and Christianity in viewing the spiritual or salvific significance of knowledge, the role of knowledge in the idea of salvation. In Islam, knowledge is central to human salvation, both in this world and in post-human life. I think I emphasized in my early lecture Islam as a way of knowledge. Right? Knowledge is central to human salvation, both in this world and in the post-human life. Whereas in Christianity, it is love that is central to salvation. Of course, this is to be not to be understood in the exclusive sense. Yeah, it's a question here of centrality rather than the exclusiveness. Thus, in Islam, it is meaningful to speak of theology of knowledge or theological dimension of epistemology. I'm giving two expressions: theology of knowledge or theological dimension of epistemology. So epistemology has a theological dimension, and in particular to speak of theology of synthesis. Now, back to the idea of analysis and synthesis as important features of the human mind. That's how I started with that. All right. What about applying the idea to God, or more precisely to the divine mind? Since you are talking about ideas, what about that? Can we do that? Can we accept the idea that God also performs analysis and synthesis? My question. Can we accept the idea that God also performs analysis and synthesis? I think many people will hesitate to answer the question, and many others will answer the question, but with different answers. With some maybe saying that the ideas of analysis and synthesis cannot be applied to divine mind. No way, cannot be applied to divine mind. And with some others accepting the attribution of analysis and synthesis to the divine mind. Yes, many others also, well, why not? It makes sense. Yeah. So those who say cannot be applied would argue that divine thought and human thought are completely different from each other. So how can we apply that? Entirely different. Having not even an iota of similarity. But those who say yes, can, they would argue that human thought is a reflection of divine thought. It's a very important thing. I learned that. Human thought is a reflection of divine thought, by which they mean that human thought has its roots in the divine mind. This is akin to the traditional Islamic idea of the connection between knowledge and iman, and iman. Right? In other words, there's a difference between thinking detached from divine rules, detached from iman, of faith in God, and another kind of thinking, reasoning, that is always aware. In fact, it's always attached to iman. So there's a detached way of thinking, and there's an attached way of thinking with respect to the divine. All right. But of course, those who say those who say that human thought is rooted in the divine mind, they are also careful to say, that yes, of course, subject to negation, subject to the realization, subject to the principle that while in the case of human thought it is possible to make errors, to err, right? But not so in the case of the divine thought. Divine thought is absolutely free of that error. Pursuing further this can or yes argument, if human thought is indeed rooted in the divine mind, then as a corollary, the human attributes of analysis and synthesis may be viewed as reflections of the divine synthesis or divine analysis and synthesis, of course, reflections to various degrees. The human mind is capable of performing analysis and synthesis, but different individuals have different levels of capacity and capability of doing that, which means that also when we look at human thought as reflections of divine thought, then there will also be degrees, levels of quality of reflection. That will be the corollary. Now, this corollary is an important idea with profound implications for human thought. One of the implications is that it would then be possible for us to speak of meaningful relations or meeting points between the human mind and the divine mind, between human thought and divine thought, and between human knowledge and divine knowledge. Now, this is already an allusion to many, many things that we accept. For example, in Islam, right? Even in other spiritual tradition. Yeah? What is revelation? What is a divine revelation? For example, revelation from Allah, from God, to the Prophet Muhammad SAW through Archangel Gabriel. Isn't that a form of this contact? It is a particular form of contact between the divine mind and the human mind. Spiritual authorities in Islam, the Sufis, talk about certain kinds of spiritual experiences that imply that meeting point between human and the divine. All right. So, in other words, I think this second view, then that will be my own opinion. Yeah? If we, I would argue I would say that yes, we can accept the idea that God performs analysis and synthesis. It is perfectly legitimate, in my view, to attribute analysis and synthesis to God as well. All right? Now, furthermore, I would argue that divine analysis, divine synthesis ought to be the model for the human mind. A question arises here. Where can we look for this divine model? Where can we look for this divine model? The answer, to me, of course, is the Quran. So we have to turn to the Quran to look for this divine model of synthesis and analysis. Yes, but philosophically, how do we justify the answer? I try to justify the answer by inviting you to understand this simple analogy. The analogy goes like this. Now, we don't know what's going on in the mind of an academic, of a scholar or a scientist. But he writes and publishes regularly. On the basis of this writing, we know what sort of analysis or synthesis has been going on in his mind. So we see an analogous situation with his divine mind. It's something in the case of the human mind, if we think carefully, yes, nobody knows what is going on in my mind until I tell people, reveal to people what I'm thinking. So I'm doing a lot of analysis, I'm doing a lot of synthesis. So people can look how I look at how my mind works. as far as analysis and synthesis is concerned by reading my writing. So I'm saying that this can be applied. Yeah. In the case of God. So we see an analogous situation with the divine mind. If we cannot observe what is in the human mind, what more in the divine mind? But then, but a big then, yeah? But then Allah is a revealing God. Allah is a revealing God. It is God's nature to reveal and to create. This is a very, very important point. Yeah? And of course, from the Islamic perspective, from the Quranic perspective, revelation is more fundamental than creation. More generally, creation is in fact, creation is a form of revelation. In fact, creation is a form of revelation. God reveals himself through creation. Why did he create? God created so that he can reveal himself, so that he can disclose his attributes and qualities. That's why through creation, through knowing creation, we can know God. Right? Because God reveals himself in the universe. And this is emphasized in the Quran. As emphasized in the Quran, God reveals himself in the universe, reveals himself in the human soul and in human history. The Quran talks about ayatullah, the signs of God. Signs of God means God's self-disclosure. God self-discloses through his numerous signs in the universe, in the microcosm, in the human soul, anfusihim, in their souls, and in human history. What happens in human history? There are big events, small events, but especially the big event. Right? We are now seeing events unfolding in the Middle East. All right, but it is part of a greater thing. God is displaying his signs in history. God reveals himself numerous times in human history through messages that he conveyed to selected individuals called prophets and messengers. So it is through these messages that we human beings can know something. In fact, not just little thing, but in fact a great deal we know about what is in God's mind. So if we read all the previous scriptures, of course the original scriptures, and the Quran, so we know what sort of messages God has been sending to humankind. Right? The nature of the messages, the form of the messages, the extent of the messages. So God reveals himself. That's why we are saying we can know from these messages, we know that God analyzes and synthesizes. And the Quran claims, of course, that it is the last such message. So it is this Quranic claim that I would like to make the basis of my discussion of the title of this lecture. The Quranic claim that it is the last. This claim, being the last divine message, is very, very important to the understanding of the idea of synthesis. So this title, the title of this lecture, Synthesis, the Raison d'être of Islam. As I mentioned earlier, of course, don't say asking what is the French term mean. It simply means that the reason or the purpose or the rationale for the existence of Islam. Synthesis is the raison d'être of Islam. Synthesis is the purpose, the reason for the existence of Islam. And the rest of my lecture is going basically is an explanation of this, or the arguments in support of that title. So as I have mentioned earlier, I will focus on the major dimension of synthesis. I decided to speak on this topic as the last. I think that the symbolism of the last. I'm talking about the last divine message, and now the last of my series of lectures is to talk about synthesis. So I hope what I hope through this lecture is that I could share with you, with others, my own understanding of a very important message, a very important idea about the Quranic message, and thus about Islam, that has not received the special treatment that I think it deserves. My discussion of my thesis in this lecture, is that synthesis is the primary reason or purpose for the existence of Islam. I will discuss this thesis in two parts. In the first part, will be a discussion of the theology of synthesis in the Quran. Since the Quran is God's thoughts, revealed to Prophet Muhammad SAW in the Arabic language, in meaning, in words and letters, and even in chapter arrangement. That is the nature of the Quran. So synthesis contained in the Quran are divine. So that's the first part. I'll talk about this. In the second part of my presentation this morning will be a discussion of several notable examples of synthesis in the history of Islamic civilization that go to show that the Muslim synthetical mind. So we are familiar with analytical mind, but now I'm going to concentrate on synthetical mind, right? So this example will go to show that the Muslim synthetical mind has been shaped to a great extent by the Quran's theology of synthesis. The first point to be emphasized about the Quranic theology of synthesis, or the Quranic theory of divine synthesis, concerns the position of the Quran itself. Right? The position of the Quran itself in relation to the idea of synthesis or divine synthesis. Not only is the Quran the source of our knowledge of different syntheses in the divine mind, but it itself is the grand synthesis. The Quran is the grand synthesis. The Quran gets its name from its two fundamental meanings. Our holy book, God calls it the Quran. Now the Quran is given the name the Quran for two fundamental reasons, or with two fundamental meanings, namely recitation and the bringing together. The meaning recitation, of course, is well known. The Quran is the recitation. Yeah. So the meaning recitation is well known, but not the meaning bringing together. According to some traditional authorities, the Quran is that which brings together. There's the second meaning here. Brings together. So according to several traditional authorities, The clearest one is Ibn al-Arabi. According to Ibn al-Arabi, that is not the only one. Yeah? The Quran is that which brings together wisdom and knowledge of all the prophets, whether contained in the scriptures or otherwise. What is it that the Quran brings together? Huh? The Quran brings together wisdom and knowledge of all the prophets. Of all the prophets, whether this is contained in the scriptures or otherwise, may not necessarily in the scripture, but in other sources. So that is very important thing. I go further. I take the idea of bringing together as implying synthesis. Am I justified to do that? Yeah. You may question, all right? But I say the idea of bringing together implies synthesis. Well, I argue that this understanding is very sound. Very sound. Since synthesis, what is synthesis? You have to understand what is synthesis, basically. Synthesis basically means the bringing together of many elements. Bringing together many elements. Combining them to form a coherent whole. The key word there is coherent whole, not simply gathering together. So this is not intellectual raja. Intellectual raja. Raja, many things. Bring together. Never mind. I don't talk. I'm not expert on raja, but the point is, the raja comprises many things together. It's not simply, one said synthesis is not simply bringing many things together and combine them in some way. All right? No, that is not enough. That is not sufficient. Something more that goes into synthesis. To combine them in such a way that there is order, meaning, coherence. That is what synthesis, the meaning of synthesis is. So, if we understand, and therefore, if that is what synthesis is, then I think I'm justified to say that the bringing together that was the destined role of the Quran. Destiny, that was the destiny of the Quran, to bring together. And that destiny is because it is the last message. In a sense, the most perfect analysis will be performed by the last. All right. Before there have been various degrees of synthesis at various points of time in history, but being the last, all right, the Quran is able to look back to the past from a very, very inclusive perspective. All right. So the Quran is viewed as the grand synthesis because it brings together knowledge and wisdom from all the previous scriptures and spiritual traditions, all right, and combines them with the new message of wisdom given to the Prophet Muhammad SAW to create a synthesis that is at once new, coherent, and unique. From the epistemological point of view, this grand synthesis is one of the miracles of the Quran. The synthesis was not created by Muhammad. Rather, it was a divine synthesis performed by the author of the Quran, who is also the one and the same source of all the previous messages to all branches of humankind. The Quran provides us with great insights into how God weaved together narratives on the prophets and other spiritual figures in human history in a synthetic and harmonious version. When we read the Quran, there's narratives, different narratives on the prophets, right? To an outsider, all right, who does not know, who is not familiar with this Quranic narrative, they say it's kind of all kinds of information just brought together, but there's no coherence. The complaint of many critics, of non-Muslim critics, is incoherence. But whereas to the believer, to the one who understands the logic of the Quran, they see order, harmony. They see order and harmony. Now, so fundamental is this scriptural synthesis. I'm introducing the term now, and another term, scriptural synthesis. So fundamental is this to the Muslim belief system that it is made one of the 6 articles of Islamic faith to believe in all the books. As we are all aware, one could not be considered as a true believer in Islam if one does not believe in all the books that God has revealed to different branches of humanity. Now, I'm using the term scriptural synthesis to signify the idea of the Quran as the synthesis of all revealed scriptures. This is a powerful concept which would help advance a wide range of studies, especially history of religions, philosophy of religion, comparative religion, and interreligious dialogue. Contemporary Quranic studies could help a great deal in the exposition of this concept. To better appreciate what I've been saying about the Quran as the grand synthesis, let me emphasize the significance of the idea of synthesis itself, which I already introduced the meaning earlier. Now, synthesis embraces or comprehends the ideas of inclusivism, the spirit not to exclude, but to include. Yeah? If you want to synthesize, but you decide only to choose some but reject others, then that is not a complete. Yeah? So the spirit of synthesis is inclusivism, and also universalism, all right, and also integration, and also creativity. So it is in a sense the opposite of exclusivism, particularism, division, and inactivity. But it is the goal of synthesis to help advance the ideas of inclusivism, universalism, integration, and creativity. Islam as a religion stands for these 4 fundamental ideas that are embodied in the concept of synthesis, the realization of which it views as its destined vocation. It is in this sense that I understand the topic synthesis, the raison d'être of Islam. Now, I go now next the Quran is a grand synthesis, but what are the major dimensions of the Quran's grand synthesis? What are the different dimensions? Let's take the major one. In my view, the most visible ones are theological synthesis, legal ethical synthesis, and epistemological synthesis, particularly its methodological dimension. The single doctrinal thread that runs through all the synthesis is the principle of at-tawhid, or the unitary principle. Let me first discuss the theological synthesis. God presents this synthesis in the Quran in several ways. Now I'm talking about, in other words, I'm presenting divine synthesis, the synthesis that was in the mind of God who revealed the Quranic message. All right. In fact, in other words, one argument that explains the God's the divine synthesis is precisely because we have this in the Quran. All right. In other words, how the Quran presents this theological synthesis. So I'm saying that God presents that the synthesis in the Quran in several ways. We can check in the Quran. We have to know the Quran well in order to appreciate this point. One way is through the concept of Islam, the Arabic word Islam, or submission. Right. But living in the 15th century of the Hijrah, 15th centuries, 14th centuries more, after the descent of the Quran, after the revelation of the Quran, when we read, when we come across any word, we tend to understand that word based on our current experience, our current knowledge, the way our mind has been shaped, by many different factors. So just this an example. This concept of Islam, because I'm saying that one of the ways God presents His theological synthesis is through the concept of Islam, which means submission. But if we understand Islam to mean what we know of Islam, then we will face some difficulty. But here we are referring to Islam as God Himself understands it, not as we think we understand. Because God is presenting His synthesis, and He used the word Islam. But if you take the word submission, if you in the English submission, then maybe immediately our mind takes a different kind of response. Takes a different response. You mention the word to the same person. Mention the word Islam. Then straight away his mind tries to relate Islam to what to his immediate knowledge and experience. But if instead of saying Islam, you first mention submission, it had been a different response. Then it might be a different response from the same person. Now the Quran says, "Inna dina indallahi Islam." Verily, the religion before God is the religion. How do you? If you maintain the Islam there, again that's open to many interpretations. Very the religion for God is Islam. The Arabic about Inna dina indallahi Islam. So English translation, very the religion before God is Islam. Supposing now you want to translate also the word that is Islam. So verily the religion before God is the religion of submission. Verily the religion before God is the religion of submission to me. God will say. Now it is interesting that Ibn Abbas, commentator of the Quran, Ibn Abbas understood this verse, all right, as referring to the Islam of all the prophets, not to the Islam, the final Islam that's brought by the prophet. Ibn Abbas said, in other words, in the sight of God, the religion that he accepted is the religion of submission. And Ibn Abbas understands, of course, this verse to refer to the Islam of all the prophets. In the sense of submission to the divine will, to God, the absolute and the infinite, there is only one Islam throughout human history. There's only one Islam. But there were many forms of Islam. That is not. But there were many forms of Islam, in as much as there were many forms of submission. The religion of Moses was Islam. But the forms of his Islam, particularly his law, is different. All right? Not the same as the Sharia or the law of Prophet Muhammad SAW. In the case of Jesus, yes, Prophet Jesus was supposed to maintain the Mosaic law, but Saint Paul in the third Christian century did not already abandoned the law, all right, in the name of the Spirit. So that making Christianity without divine law in the sense that Jews and Muslims understand. Now, in this sense, the first Islam was that of Adam, Prophet Adam, alayhi the first human being and also the first prophet. The final Islam is that of Muhammad, the last prophet. In between Prophet Adam and Prophet Muhammad, there were many forms of Islam. Well, according to the Prophet, there were altogether 124,000 prophets. It's a long list. So it is also in this universal sense of Islam, a submission, that the Quran refers to the prophets as Muslims, one who submits. The Islam revealed to Prophet Muhammad SAW is the final synthesis of all the previous forms of Islam that were identified with different prophets. So it's the idea of synthesis. Theological synthesis, one form of theological synthesis that is to be found in the Quran. That's how the Quran narrates this spiritual history from Prophet Adam salam until Prophet Muhammad. Well, I'm using the word here, synthesis. So the final Islam is the synthesis, and this has implication again for Muslim. The implication is how they view the other religions should be in the light of this truth. Yes, we may have complaints, we may have grievances, we may protest about changes that happen, but the point is the more fundamental idea here is the original. In other words, this originally revealed. I mean that there must be still, if you don't accept all, there must be still plenty of ideas in the other Islam that are acceptable. And the function of the Quran is to be the musaddiqan. Musaddiqan, it means to be to confirm what Islam. The coming of Islam is to confirm the truth that has been sent before. If there is no truth at all to confirm, I mean, it doesn't make sense. There must be plenty of truth to be confirmed by the Quran. All right. Now, another way in which God presents the theological synthesis in the Quran is through the concept of God's self-disclosure. Self-disclosure. Tajalli. Self-disclosure. Or, in other words, in the true revelation, God tells his names. Now, this narrative, God revealed his names to the prophets. God revealed some names. The issue here is, did God tell each prophet all the same names of his, or not? That is the theological question. All right. Well, according to the Quranic narrative, God's self-disclosure to the prophets before Prophet Muhammad was partial, not full. It's not full self-disclosure. Maybe this is a good exercise for some students or postgraduate students. All right, if you want to compare, let's say, look at all the divine qualities, names, qualities, attributes mentioned in each of the religious scriptures. You just say, take the Bible and the Quran. Yes, I think it's an interesting exercise, right? Does the Bible tell the same number of divine names, qualities, attributes as in the Quran. But according to the claim of the Quran, said no. The claim of the Quran itself is you may want to contest the Quranic claim, but the Quranic claim is that prophets, different times of history, yes, were taught divine names, but not all the names. In other words, the divine self-disclosure was not as comprehensive as in the Quran. In the Quran, it's symbolized by the 99 beautiful names. Yeah, in other words, the divine self-disclosure in the Quran is symbolized by that 99 names. I say symbolized because it's not exactly. It's not to say that Allah has only 99 names, because in his famous book Al-Ghazali on the divine names, on the beautiful names, he said hundreds and hundreds of divine qualities, names that can be derived from the Quran. So this is another way, and I have to go to the narrative, the Quranic narrative, which is centered on the God's self-disclosure. There are other ways in which the Quran presents the theological synthesis, but because of time, I'll not. The only thing is also the third one in the sense, but this third way that is found in the Quran, I discuss it under another category of synthesis, which is the legal ethical synthesis. Remember, I mentioned three: theological synthesis, which I've talked about; legal ethical synthesis. It could be included under theological, but I have it separately. Now, legal ethical synthesis here, and the other one is epistemological. Briefly, legal ethical synthesis here, referring to the synthesis of the divine laws, the Sharia. Because the Quran says, the Quranic narrative is this: to every prophet, God has given the Shira and Minhaj. In other words, a spiritual way and what I call here the legal ethical way, as referring to the Sharia. It's very it's not exactly the translation, but what I mean here is the Sharia. The word Sharia is mentioned only once in the Quran. The other one, Sharia, is different. Yeah? It's related to that, of course. But the Quranic narrative now is about this, that in the spiritual history of mankind, different prophets have been given different laws. Now, this is represented here is done with Islam, with the coming of the final Islam. Prophet Muhammad has given a divine law, a Sharia, which is the most comprehensive, given by virtue of the fact that this is going to be the Sharia of all times. There's not going to be any more new Sharia from God. So the Sharia given the Prophet Muhammad as a complete code of life that is from his time, from the Prophet Muhammad until the end of time, which means here again the contention, the claim by the Quran that the universal law for humanity is the final Sharia. So it is in the light of this synthesis that scholars of Islamic law have looked at the different sources, of Islamic law. It's not just what is in the Quran, not just in the Hadith, right? But also even the customs, the tradition, the adat, right? Accepted. Yeah? That's a very important idea that Islam accepts the very, in a sense, a place and a role, positive place and role for indigenous laws that are not contrary They are not contrary to the Sharia. Whereas we know very well, in the experience of the colonial powers, Western colonial powers, how they have devastated, have obliterated the indigenous laws in the name of civilization and progress. So that we have to see the significance of that. Now, the other synthesis is the epistemological synthesis. And I concentrate on the methodological dimension. With regard to methodology, meaning to understand what are the different sources of knowledge, the different avenues to knowledge. This is what I mean, the synthesis. In the Quran provides this narrative about the epistemological synthesis. It listed, or rather it mentions all the different avenues to knowledge. Revelation is one source. Knowledge given to the prophets, who in turn tell the people. This was one. Ilham, inspiration, that's one. Another other kind of spiritual experiences. Reasoning as another source. Our physical senses, our empirical tools are there. Now, the unitary perspective of Islam does not see all these different means of acquiring knowledge as anarchy. It's not like Faraban who talks about this anarchy, multiplicity of methods, the plurality of methods, what they call methodological pluralism does not mean anarchy. In Islamic epistemology, in the Quranic epistemology, in other words, yes, all knowledge comes from God, but the way knowledge comes to human being, that goes to a diverse range of means. I think that's the idea of epistemological synthesis. Now, I still haven't got it. The second. I think I better start the first part there. Still have the second part. Now, the second part of my thesis, I'm going to discuss major examples of intellectual synthesis that were performed by Muslim minds at several points of time in the history of civilization. I describe this intellectual synthesis as civilizational, since their scope and impact were of civilizational proportions. For the purpose of this discussion, I select and talk briefly the synthesis performed by Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, and Ibn Khaldun. If you study the history of Islamic thought, there are so many syntheses, especially the smaller ones. I just keep aside. But these different examples, all right, as I said, go to show the synthetical mind of these Muslim thinkers and scholars. Now, if we look at the history of Islam, the 10th and 11th centuries, or the 4th and the 5th centuries of the Hijrah, may be described as the golden era of Islamic synthesis in various areas of thought. Out of these four figures, two I discussed briefly. I discussed quite then, Al-Farabi and Al-Ghazali, in my book Classification of Knowledge in Islam, where this I refer to this synthesis, especially Al-Farabi, for example, the kinds of synthesis that he performed. Basically, philosophical synthesis. Al-Farabi synthesized ideas from different sources, from Plato, from Aristotle, Neoplatonism, from the Quran itself, right? So it was a major synthesis of the 4th century, or the 10th century of the Common Era. Major synthesis, particularly in philosophy, and more so in political philosophy, and also in philosophy of law. one aspect that has not been studied as far as Arabic philosophy of law. In a sense, he presented, he was discussing Maqasid al-Sharia, but not from the legal perspective, but rather from the philosophical perspective. In other words, he talked about the philosophy of law, the purposes. Why God sends his laws to all the prophets. The purpose of the laws, or the divine laws. Isn't that something related to Maqasid al-Sharia? It is. But because he was a philosopher, so many Muslims just want to forget as if that they are not, these philosophers have nothing to do with the thoughts on Sharia. Now, Al-Farabi managed to come out with the synthesis in philosophy of law, particularly in political philosophy, because it is in political philosophy that really he came up with a new science called Al-Madani. So the science, which I translated as science of civilization, because there is a synthesis. That new science constitutes a synthesis of many ideas about society. In a sense, it's a synthesis of history, of philosophy, of sociology. Is that there was the first Muslim attempt at a synthesis which gives rise to science of civilization. You cannot create science of civilization without creating some form of synthesis of ideas. All right. The thinking with Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina also create a synthesis. The most important synthesis performed by Ibn Sina is in the field of medical thought, in medicine. How he synthesized the prophetic medicine, the Tib Nabawi, prophets. He synthesized the prophet's medicine, the Greek medicine, the Persian medicine, the Indian medicine. And that synthesis resulted in his book, The Canons of Medicine, which became a textbook in greater part of the world, including in the West. The fact that the Canons of Medicine was used as textbook in medical schools in the West until the 18th century must speak a lot about the quality of that synthesis. So when the West decided to leave it, ready to set aside, it was not because the West has come up with a superior theory to canons of medicine. It was not for that reason. They just set aside because the West wanted to make a new approach to medicine. That's all. So canons of medicine was set aside because the West decided that they want to go for a different perspective, and because they want to go to the mechanical philosophy of nature, including the mechanization of the human body. In other words, to come out with this mechanistic medicine. The West wanted to do with mechanistic medicine, where the body is regarded as a machine. So that was Ibn Sina. And as for Al-Ghazali, Al-Ghazali was a jurist. He was a mutakallim. He was a philosopher. He was a philosopher. He was a Sufi. So he has four different perspectives. In a sense, there were four rooms in Al-Ghazali's mind. But would he be a happy man, peaceful, in a sense? If all the four compartments fight against each other, for each other, no. All were in place. Yeah, he was a scholar of jurisprudence, a scholar of rational theology, a scholar of philosophy, a scholar of Sufism. But the fact that he was a man of peace, he was harmony, his harmonious thinking, is precisely because there was synthesis in his mind. Al-Ghazali had succeeded in performing synthesis in his own mind. And I think the best evidence of his single mind is the book Ihya al-Ulumuddin. Ihya al-Ulumuddin is Al-Ghazali's synthesis. In order to find synthesis of his thought, it is in that magnum opus. Of course, the synthesis was done within a spiritual framework. The framework in which he performed that is a spiritual one. Then Ibn Khaldun, 400 years later, more than 400 years later, 500 years after Al-Farabi, performed another synthesis, a major synthesis in his the Muqaddimah. Yeah? In a sense, it is a synthesis of history, of philosophy, of kalam, of sociology, science of society. And in my writing, I mentioned that the true successor to Al-Farabi in the science of society, in the science of civilization, was Ibn Khaldun. Because Ibn Khaldun came up with the concept of civilization as more comprehensive than the one provided by Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun was than Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi was more interested in urban civilization. But in the case of Ibn Khaldun, his Umran, his science of Umran, is much more comprehensive than Al-Farabi's this Ilm al-Madani, Al-Ilm al-Madani. So I can go on talking about the different synthesis. And this synthesis, the different synthesis are very important to what is called to Islamization. There's no progress, real progress in the Islamization of knowledge until we accept this idea of synthesis, the important role of synthesis. Islamization needs synthesis. All right. So, in a sense, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, when they encountered Greek thought and other sources, they were performing also Islamization of knowledge through synthesis. So, it is very, very important concept. All right, let me conclude. All right, what about our times now? Yeah, because what I'm saying is that the synthesis is the raison d'être of Islam, the basis, the rationale, the main purpose of Islam, which means that, and this is not a one-time job. It's not a one-time task. It is destiny of Islam to be the champion of this synthesis. I think the future of the Ummah, the future of Islamic civilization would depend very much to what extent we, in a sense, have the spirit of synthesis with us. The world today, yes, has produced a lot of knowledge and so on, but and the world is fragmented into different things. The world is has fallen into analysis. There have been people saying that the 20th century is the century of analysis. It's the most in other words, everybody doing analysis but not synthesis. So what the world needs is synthesis, which is the very basis for the coming of Islam. So thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walaikum salam. Thank you very much, Professor Osman Bakar. It's a very, very rich topic, very, very rich presentation. Within a short time, you have presented a lot of ideas, rich ideas. I cannot reflect on all of them, but they are full of depth of your discussion about synthesis and the topic of today's lecture, which focuses on three types of synthesis. To summarizes the synthesis of theology, synthesis of legal and ethical synthesis, and third is the synthesis of epistemology. It's very, very well presented. So I look forward towards your more writing about this topic. And with this, I open it up for questions and answers session. So the first question we have here is from Nuruddin, is asking, Professor Osman, to what extent is the Islamic view of synthesis in line with Hegelian tradition of synthesis? Can Zionism be positioned as an application of Hegelian synthesis?
Really, I don't want to spend on that because to compare between the two, I mean, this is a far cry, you know. I will explain. If you to explain, if you know what Hegel and others in the Western scholars have done in their synthesis, then you know yourself. I mean, that there's a big difference. Yeah. It doesn't mean that synthesis. Yeah, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I'm also studying the intellectual synthesis in the modern West. It is important if I want to synthesize Islamic thought with other forms of thought including outside Islam. Then but we know. I mean, in terms of the comprehensiveness, in terms of the inclusiveness of that synthesis, is hardly comparable. All right, especially to talk about the theological synthesis.
Yeah.
Maybe in the philosophical synthesis, certainly when compared to our Muslim thinkers, and this is the problem. When we compare to our contemporary Muslim thinkers, as far as philosophical synthesis is concerned, there's a wide gap. There's a wide gap. Okay.
Another question was by Emer, and where is I'm trying to I cannot find. He's asking, within the framework of Almighty, of which we may have an idea, but many never fully comprehend. Everyone does not comprehend the idea of the framework of synthesis from God. I think that's what he wants to say. It is impossible to comprehend fully the idea of synthesis.
Well, we cannot know what is in God's mind. We can only know what He revealed. So our job, therefore, don't try to look for what is in God's mind. No, we can't. But then God revealed, and He revealed in the scriptures, and the final revelation is in the Quran. So, in order to understand God's intentions, God's program, what's in mind, the Quran is God's message. The Quran is God's word that contains His message. So, since the meaning, the words, the letters come from God, not from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we will understand. Yeah, if we understand the Quran, then we understand what is in God's mind. Yeah, I think that's simple as that. Yeah, how can we understand what is God's mind?
Yeah.
No, the Quran. The Quran is the Quran tells what is in his mind. Okay.
All right. Now I'm going to the questions which have come on the Facebook from Safiya Saleh. If human is the reflection of Allah's mind, humans are prone to error. Are the abrogated verses errors by Allah?
Well, that we are going into the dispute, all right, to the khilaf, different understanding of abrogation, all right. If you look at the literature on abrogation, there are a lot of views that are self-contradictory, but in other words, I don't accept, for example, the meaning of abrogation to mean that with the coming of Islam, all the truths given to the previous prophets are abrogated, all right, and even in the field of law, right. So let's say now the fact that Muslims can take kosher food of the Jews, right? That is a simple example. This proves the understanding of everything that came before Prophet Muhammad, all illegal or haram or no. That's not the case. Yeah? The fact that Islamic law provides legal space for the Ahlul Kitab. All right. So you can say that with the coming of the Muhammadan Sharia, therefore the Sharia of the previous prophets are all to be thrown into the dustbin. That is not the view. So therefore it depends on how we understand abrogate. Abrogate, the correct one is you replace with something better, something more comprehensive, more appropriate, depending on the context. So the Muhammadan Sharia, in a sense, because it comprehends, the Sharia given to the Prophet Muhammad comprehends the earlier Sharia because it is more comprehensive. Okay. Why more comprehensive? Because the needs of the time. You come last. Yeah, you cannot expect the Sharia of Prophet Abraham and Sarah. No? Yeah, some still stays. With regard to the spiritual rituals, for example. But when it comes to deal with the laws for society, the latter laws, which mean the Prophet Muhammad's Sharia, that will be the norm. Will be the norm. So, but for non-Muslims who do not want to accept Sharia, they should have their own Sharia. In other words, they can follow their own Sharia.
Yeah, I'll come to further questions to ask people who want to ask directly. But let me take the questions from the chat box. There's a question that if Islam and Quran are the final synthesis, then what about the distortions in major world religions? Distortions in type of Trinity and polytheism. Does this mean that Islam as final synthesis contradicts the concepts of religious pluralism?
See, maybe I did not expand earlier. The Quran as the synthesis of the previous scriptures is not. This is to be understood from the previous scriptures is not as they exist in their proper in their current form, but as revealed in our word, the original scripture that was revealed to the earlier prophets. What happened to the history of those scriptures? That is a different matter. And that is where the rule, but then still the Quran cannot run away from that. That's why God said, the Quran, one of your names is Musaddiqun. What is Musaddiqun? You confirm the truth, the true one. You confirm truth that has been given earlier. And you also Muhaimin. Also Muhaimin. What is Muhaimin? Muhaimin means that you are the guardian. You are the guardian in terms of interpretation and so on. If you take seriously this concept of Muhaimin in the Quran, it will mean that we'll be telling to our brothers in the, or maybe our colleagues in other religions, for example, let's say the Christian, to tell actually, in principle, the Quran has the right, as Muhaimin, to interpret the Quran and to interpret the Bible. But is Muslims playing that role now to implement the role of the Quran as Muhaimin, as the guardian, as the interpreter in terms of how to understand the scriptures? Because the idea of the Quran as the synthesis means that the Quran is given that capacity, is given that the means to understand the earlier scriptures, if not in details, at least in principle. That's what it means. That is mean the idea of synthesis. Yeah. That's why I would like to see this idea of synthesis to be studied in a deeper way. You know, I thought it's very important one, so I wanted to share. But this needs to be studied further. The idea of synthesis.
Yeah. Okay. Brother Irwan, Hanish, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Bismillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. My question is, I would like to hear more on your thoughts on epistemological dimension of the synthesis, and also especially in relation to natural sciences, and also what is your opinion on how to present this grand synthesis in the conversations that are dominated by postmodernism, where the grand narrative is kind of rejected?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in presenting epistemological synthesis to the contemporary world is not easy, precisely because some of the elements in that synthesis, as maintained by Islamic epistemology, are being questioned or rejected. Let's say, for example, revelation. Now, revelation, divine revelation, that the idea that God reveals knowledge about himself and also about the world, about the natural world. God reveals that in the Quran, means that revelation has to be accepted as an element within the epistemological theory. All right? But I think today's scientists are divided into two. One is, of course, they simply reject because they don't believe in God. Just simply do not want to accept. That there are other ways of knowing the world. Another group, of course, although they have not studied the Quran, but they have an open mind. Yeah, they have an open mind. I think that's what Maurice Bakar before, when he first started trying to understand, all right, he approached in the objective spirit, all right. He did not yet accept the idea of revelation, but by studying the content of the Quran, he felt that because the current methodology simply cannot explain how the Quran can come up with very important aspects of scientific knowledge that were unknown during the time it was revealed. But my point is, this issue of revelation has to be addressed. Including how to respond to those who don't believe in God, who don't believe in the spiritual one, which led them to reject revelation. But the point is this part of that. Now, but anyway, to cut it short here, contemporary epistemology believes in one single method of knowing, which is the empirical method. Even this question of, you know very well the debate in Britain, in England especially, but in Europe, between the partisans of empiricism and the partisans of rationalism, because two groups fighting against each other, saying that one group saying that no, the real way to knowledge is rationalism, the other one is empiricism. But that kind of debate never existed in the history of Islamic thought, because there are two, both are correct, both are valid, both are valid. So that's why the Quran comes up with so many different ways, even dream now. If you are believers, we have to believe in the story of Prophet Joseph, Nabi Yusuf, all right? The science of dreams, So dreams is one way also, all right. So what if one does not want to build, to think that dreams have any meaning? Then let it be your own personal philosophy. Don't make it to tell others we must reject. There's no place for interpretations of dreams. So go to the Quran. So there is a place for the physical senses. The emphasis in the Quran on the physical senses, on seeing, hearing, and so it's so repeated emphatically. Then of course reason. What are the different powers of reasoning? Why should we only? That's why we need to open up now to other views about the powers of reason and intellect. Muslims wrote numerous works on the intellect, on the powers of the intellect. Why should only now talk about intelligence in the narrow sense, even that reducing now to artificial intelligence? We reduce now. It looks like now we are being brainwashed to think that the machine is going to be cleverer than us. I mean, this is absurd. This is absurd. But some of us seem to be, let's go along the way. We are not critical enough. We are not critical enough. The most critical part of us is our intellect and reason. You reduce our intellect and reason to just artificial intelligence, I don't know what's going to happen. That's why they say we will become slaves of machines. Why we want to accept that? All right. So therefore epistemological synthesis in the Quran is very, 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 very important. You have to, I just point out that, I just grasp that, but you all have to explain it, to formulate it in more details, rather than trying to look at books on the epistemology written by people who don't believe in God and other things. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Very well. You said there very, very, very well that we should not follow and just take the reductive approaches to knowledge and epistemology, which is going around and think that yes, artificial intelligence is the final interpretation, tool which can be used. And the second question, the question here I have is from Ahmed Badri, which is kind of related. He's asking again the same question in a different way. That what do you think about systems thinking in the West?
Well, system thinking is nothing wrong in itself. No, it's nothing wrong in itself. How can we object? No, we can object, but we can point out to limitation. So this thing from the kinds of questions being asked, it's always kind of either or thing, either or. No, it is not either or. Everything has its place. In other words, Islamic epistemology is not opposed to system thinking. Because it is possible to think of something as a system. But the question is whether the system explains everything. Whether this system is exhaustive in its explanatory power. So let's say, for example, the Newton's mechanistic philosophy, looking at the world as a mechanical system, all right, in a sense, it's not a system. Well, for a long time, yeah, it conquered the minds of people because it corresponds to an aspect of truth. See? But then it's not the whole truth. Systems thinking corresponds to an aspect of truth, but it is not the whole truth. In other words, systems thinking must be supplemented, must be complemented by other ways of thinking. Never reduce our thinking to only one way. Our intellect has different powers. Have we? Yeah. To exhaust these powers means much more than what we're having now. Yeah? To exhaust, yeah, the rational powers. All the Muslim cognitive psychologists, yeah, especially among the peripatetic philosophers, they talk about what? They talk about the powers, core. Yeah? They talk about the powers of reason, the intellect, the rational powers. Have we explored all of these rational powers? I think that is the question. So the question, why is it, what we think about the system thinking? Well, to the extent, what important is take the Quran as our Furqan. Another name of the Quran is Al-Furqan, meaning the criteria of truth and error. To know whether what we are saying is true, can check. If you are not sure, can check with the Quran. Can check with the works by all the authorities, Muslim authorities of the past when it comes to thinking. Authorities on thinking. If you ask me, did the Muslim world in the past have more, deal better with regarding thinking, or the contemporary world? I would say certainly when Islam was at its creative best, yeah, of course not the period of decline, but when the Muslims were thinking a lot, yeah. In other words, they come out with plenty of good works on human thinking. Why not we access the treasury of Islamic thought? All right? Why not we access that treasury when it comes to know more about human thinking? Okay.
Okay, Brother Radhi, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Eid Mubarak to everyone, especially Prof. Okay, it is interesting that you mentioned the idea of analysis against synthesis. In a sense, you said that nowadays there's too much analysis and that creates too fragmented thoughts. And that seems to point out to the so many evils in the world right now, people with conflicting ideas and all that. And it seems that you are right, synthesis is the way. My question is, how does that whole idea fit? That synthesis is the way, and it is the raison d'etre of Islam within the akhir zaman, the eschatology of events. The way things are happening right now with the fighting in Israel, there's so much hadith about akhir zaman, that they are going to be war or Armageddon or whatever, and that eventually it will lead to the coming of, I don't know if everybody believes this, in the coming of the Al-Mahdi and Isa. And I believe that. I wanted to see the golden age of Imam Mahdi. Would that be the total synthesis of everything? That is my question in our current issue.
I don't think there is a constructive synthesis, just more imagine things, trying to imagine things, what could be. No, I mean, the real synthesis is creative, It's very creative. In other words, now, just facing with this kind of problems that we see, let's say what's going on in the Middle East, that's really now thinking of when is Imam Mahdi coming to help. That's not constructive thinking, right? Do what we can. Forget whether it's coming or not. Yeah. Otherwise, we are creating false hopes. I don't want to see Muslims raising false hopes. Some good news somewhere quickly grab. I see this, and there's a lot of the viral. It's displaying that kind of a thinking. Even old thing reviral this is not constructive thinking. Not the kind of synthesis that I have in mind. Yeah. Synthesis starts with what we have here. So we have. All right. You create synthesis. Create more things coming. Create bigger synthesis. Right. I think try to live based on the reality now. Response. Try to analyze where are our weaknesses, why we are in this situation. Yeah, because if we are if God allows us to be in this kind of situation, it might be something that resulted from our own fault. Yeah, own fault. I think so. I think has to understand that the concept I said just now of bringing together the synthesis, bringing together element. Certainly, you bring things that are within our reach, not imagine things. Yeah. So, in a sense, very empirical. It's very empirical. We start with what we currently have, make them better. Yeah. And through collective synthesis, we can do more. But and this is something that is within our capability to perform, inshallah. So perform the synthesis in your own discipline first. Yeah, everybody has discipline. So if your discipline is in biomedicine, there's a lot of, why not try to perform synthesis, ideas on medicine from Islamic sources, from Western sources, whatever the sources are, as long as they are considered as true facts. Yeah, I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Okay, there's a question from Facebook, and I think this is a quote from Emer Shimel or Christoph Schoen, as far as I can recall. Can you comment about on the statement that Islam is the meeting between God as such and man as such?
Yes, there is a quotation from Understanding Islam by Prof. Schoen, which itself is based on the Quran. All right? There is the hadith referring to the division of the Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter. The first three verses that are God's. They belong to God. The last three, there's a human, there's a man. In between, and what is that in between? Malik Yawmiddin. That belongs to both God and man. God and man share that verse. And the key word there is Yawmiddin, Din. Din sometimes often referred to as religion. But why do translators of the Quran translate that as the day of judgment? Because the day of judgment is the final day of the encounter between God and man. That is the final encounter. But in this world, we are encountering the encounter of God and man happens all the time. All right, happens all the time. In fact, I would like to define religion. Religion is the encounter between God and man. Why do we have different religion? Because different religion, each religion has its own conception of the scope of the encounter, the nature of the encounter. But it applies to our religion. Religion is basically about encounter. The secular religion say, as far as society is concerned, this is not the place for encounters between God and man. But in Islam, there is no space. There is no space in which there is no encounter between God and man, and therefore there is no secular space. There cannot be any secular space from this point of view. Yeah? Because the encounter between God and man is everywhere. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, Emer is asking the question again about synthesis. I'm trying to paraphrase. When we have the idea that the previous scriptures are corrupted, how can we address the question of synthesis?
How do we know which one is corrupted and is not corrupted? I mean, that statement is a very, very general remark. It's not based on a proper scholarly study. If you feel that any has been corrupted, point it out. You cannot say that the whole book has been corrupted. Yeah? How can you say the whole book corrupted? When I read the Bible, there are so many things which I think is agreeable to the Quran.
Yeah.
How can you say it is 100% corrupted? But yes, there may be something that we differ from our Christian friends. For example, the question of the Parakletos or President, the question of whether how to interpret the Ahmad. You know, when in the Quranic narrative, then Jesus announced the arrival or the coming of Ahmad. What was the Greek word for that? Yeah. So that one, okay. I mean, the Christians don't accept the Quranic interpretation, fine. But then, at least we know we differ in interpretation of certain verse in the Bible. All right, that's different. Yeah. So I think for Muslim, better stop saying that the Bible is corrupted. Full stop. No, I don't think we do great honor to Islam. Yeah, we speak from the perspective of truth. That's why I said the Quran is musaddiqun. The Quran confirms the truth that came into the earlier thing. Then look for the truth. Look for the truth in those, right? Yeah. For those which we are skeptical, which we think are clearly contradictory, then let that be, you on your position and we on our position. But at least we know where the corruption has taken place. It's no point saying that other people are corrupted without knowing without able to tell where exactly the corruption has happened. This is a matter of honor to Muslim, to the Quran.
Yeah. It reminds me of your previous comments, which I follow also in my research, is that we search for Islam in other scriptures and just not go with the idea that everything is corrupted. Okay. This question again about synthesis as in the epistemology, will it lead to confusion of knowledge? If you are doing synthesis epistemologically, will it lead to confusion of knowledge?
No, because our synthesis is not. Because our synthesis means we are only dealing with what is true. We're dealing with truth, not what is not true. What is false. In other words, synthesis is also a process whereby we shift, we shift the true from the false. Otherwise, you have Roja. Synthesis is not Roja. Roja, we have a kind of Roja nowadays where truth and falsehood are mixed. So we have mixtures, like we have in a cyberspace. Cyberspace is a place where truth and error are mixed, which confuse people. Yeah. But true synthesis is very, very, very explanatory. So you have to understand. Now, when I talk about synthesis is the true synthesis, which does not bring confusion. On the contrary, this synthesis will bring clarity. Clarity is the purpose of this synthesis. Yeah, we must differentiate between synthesis and simply mixture. Yeah, it's simply uninformed collection. That's not synthesis. Otherwise, it's false synthesis, fake synthesis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very well said. That synthesis is not Roja. It makes it very understanding and simplified understanding for people to understand that, yes. And you are right that these days on the internet, and especially in what is going on in relation to Palestine, there is so much Roja, that we don't know where is the truth and where is the falsehood. Because some of so it basically comes back to us that we find where is the truth and stand for the truth and support for the truth, and that's where we challenge the wrong things which are done to the Palestinians or to any other suffering humanity, also in relation to the COVID and coronavirus, which has made us into this age of rojak, of confusion of knowledge. I think this is the last question, and this was the last question. So, and we are on time. So I will end here, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Osman for his 7 lectures, excellent lectures with full of knowledge, full of richness. There's a question just come up. So before I need to go back. So there's a question from Brother Fatamir at UIA Gombak campus. He's asking the question, do you encourage Muslims to read Bible, or this is just not to create problems with Christians? Allah has stated in the Quran the truth clearly, so they do not have to search for the truth. Can you explain further on this issue? Do you encourage Muslims to read the Bible, or because this is just not to create problems with Christians?
Well, I even say for Muslims, reading the Bible is not fardu kifaya. It's not fardu kifaya. Yeah? Muslims have the Quran. That is already sufficient.
Yes.
It's already sufficient. For the great majority of Muslims, they should just concentrate on reading the Quran, understand the Quran, all right? But for a small number of Muslims, they are academics, they are scholars, they are thinkers, all right? They are active participants in the interfaith dialogue, all right? Yes, well, miss, go and read. Go and read, not just the Bible, but also the other scriptures. But make sure that you understand the Quran first.
Yeah.
Understand the Quran first. That is the precondition to study
Bible.
This is not only a question of religion. Even on secular, even in secular life, all right? You go even in our university, or you take courses at undergraduate, for example. This kind of condition is imposed. Has nothing to do with God, nothing to do with religion, all right? So the professor is saying, before you read that advanced book, or whatever, you read this book first. Yeah, don't go straight and read the other one. So that's nothing to do with religion. Just common sense. It's just common sense. So it's a question of common sense. Okay, why are you so interested to read the Bible? Have you read the Quran? You answer the question first. Okay.
Yeah, we need to do research before engaging in interreligious dialogue. Understanding is most important. Understanding of our own epistemological position of the Quran before we engage with other scriptures. We just don't jump into other scriptures and other traditions without having a background of the Quranic position. So again, let me try to conclude here. Professor Osman, thank you very much for your 7 lectures. They were excellent, full of knowledge and richness. We learned a lot from you every time when you come. I respect you for you as one of the most important philosophers of our times, not only in Malaysia but at the universal level, and you have been acknowledged for this. And I look forward, we all, the audience here today, we are about 70 people here today. I look forward to the publication of your lectures, of these 7 lectures in a book form, inshallah. So wishing you all the best and thanking you especially from the ISTAC community engagement lectures, and myself as a Deputy Dean of Student Development and Community Engagement. Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.